just over $1 million in, about 30 months. So.
Unbelievable. And it's interesting, I know Rich asked you, like, what led you to multifamily? You read those books, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and the book about, is it authored by Donald Trump?
Yeah, so Art of the Deal, is that the one you said? Yeah, Art of the Deal.
So you read those 2 books,
yeah.
and it let you made 2 moves on 4plexes, but then you knew and you were compelled to move on these storage units. How did you know that they were a good deal, not knowing anything about that asset class?
Because I knew his so what he shared with us, he was, it was ran by him, right? His brother was kind of helping him. His mom wasn't helping anymore, but his brother would kind of flake out, it sounded like. And so, he just got to the point where, like, he was collecting cash, not really reporting everything. There wasn't a lot of leases. And so I took what I did know, and so he shared, because he didn't have a P&L, he shared all of his tax returns. And so I showed the amount that he showed that he was making on his tax returns, and in my mind I'm like, well, that's the least that he's bringing in right now. That's not including all the cash, right? So if we actually, and it worked, the deal terms, the way that we did it, it cash flowed that way. So I'm like, really, there's probably a lot of money coming in that is just not being reported. And so that's kind of how I made sense of it. I'm like, we really couldn't lose in that deal, because we were about break even, maybe a little bit better than break even though there was so much vacancy and he wasn't reporting all the cash and everything. So I just kind of knew, and that goes back to reading those books. The Art of the Deal by Trump. It really, like, the biggest thing that I took away from there is there's a million different ways to do deals, structure deals, and just be creative and put yourself in a position where you can kind of win. And so I just kind of used Rich Dad Poor Dad, and by then, some other books, and just, kind of started pulling strings and started negotiating on what I was comfortable with. But I kind of would sit on the same side of the table as a seller to try to get him comfortable, as well. And it worked out really, really good.
Yeah, I like what you did there, and for our listeners, like, what Justin did is he was kind of verifying income. So you can get property level bank statements, and you can ask the seller to send you his bank statements to make sure those transfers are actually going in. But as we know, you can still make that fraudulent. You could have one bank account of yours transferred to another.
Yeah.
And kind of lie about that.
Yeah, and I mean, like, but the thing is with these bigger assets, like we bought, we went on to buy a 96 unit building, an 88 unit building, a 199 unit building, a 218 unit. The deal we're closing here in a couple days, a 178 unit. We're not getting bank statements from those type of sellers, right? I mean, they're barely. One of the guys that I've dealt with in this property that I'm closing on next week, it's the second property I bought from him, and some of his financials are. I'm like, but when you look at the rent roll, you look at the leases that are there, you make sense of it.
But I like when you ask for the tax return. You can fudge the property level bank statements, even though it is a little time consuming, but no one's going to fudge their tax return and overestimate.
Right. And I mean, when you look at a tax return, right, the income is going to be as low as possible, and the expenses are going to be as high as possible, right? So no one's going to say that they're making more to the government than what, especially when you're dealing with a mom and pop who's taking cash, right? And no one's going to, report less expenses than what they really have. So unless they're that unorganized, but they're trying to usually get more expense, right? So.
Absolutely. So Justin, walk us through that first larger multifamily deal. Kind of talk a little bit about that one.
So the first larger one that we did was 2016. That was 88 units. I was just eager to kind of move forward, and I remember we bought it for like $65,000 a unit, and people were like, "Jesus, what are you paying $65,000 a unit for?" And I'm like, "Well, it works." Now today, like, people would go back and buy that deal all day and be like, "Oh, you weren't crazy, obviously." But I really remember I just wanted to get through to closing. I wanted to make sure that there was enough rents coming into what they showed as had for expenses. The one thing that I didn't account for, and this is the power of cash flow producing real estate and multifamily, I didn't account for the freaking roofs that we were gonna have to replace, the freaking boiler systems we're gonna have to replace. They were shot, and I just, like, being my first bigger deal, all that CapEx stuff, I'm like, we got like 10 years, we'll figure it out. Well, year 3, we had to replace the roofs. We got some insurance money there, so that helped. Year 2, we replaced the boilers, and so it's to the point now where, like, that revenue when we bought it, I think, was sitting around like $55,000 a month. Now we have $95,000 to $100,000 a month there. So we've been able to, we've put in probably $1 million into that property or so, but it's a really nice property now. And, we bought it for $6 yeah, 6, and it's probably, if it hit the market, there'd probably be a buyer for between 11.5 to 12.5 million today. So because of the cash flow, we were able to get a little bit more money from the banks to be able to figure out those projects and stuff like that. If we didn't have the cash flow, that would have been a tough situation to figure out. Okay, how we fixing the roofs, how we taking care of the boilers so we have heat and all this stuff. And then that really set the foundations. Like, okay, now we got to have like a better capital expenditure plan going forward here. And that's tough sometimes because you want to get deals done, but at the same time, like, you got to be able to take care of the asset and have a plan for that. So.
And what vintage was that asset, and what MSA was it?
Yeah, so that asset built in 2 phases, like 93 and 95. But it's just like, ever since it was built, it was evident that there was no money put back into the deal. I mean, they stripped everything out and took all the cash. It's in Delavan, Wisconsin. So Delavan's a smaller town. I mean, it's, I'm in Janesville, Wisconsin, which, Janesville's about 70,000 people. Delavan's about 15 miles away, kind of halfway between here and Milwaukee. Obviously Milwaukee being a big metropolitan area, but Delavan's a lake community. There's a nice lake in Delavan where a lot of people from Chicago come up and stuff during the summer. But its population is 5,000, 6,000 people. So it's not a big demographic, but it's been a great rental market for us. It's a desirable community, but there hasn't been a lot of new construction to come and compete with. So it's a tight market, and it's been a good little property for us.
You mentioned there was a insurance claim on that property, and I've always been curious what those claims look like on a larger scale with multifamily. We've never experienced it ourselves yet. Could you mind sharing with our listeners what that was all about?
Yeah, I mean, that was just it was hail damage, and there was a hailstorm that came through, and we were looking at having to get, update roofs at some point anyways, and so we, because one of the roofs, there's 11 buildings out there, each building has 8 units, and one of the buildings we already need to replace the roof, and a huge storm came through, and, there's this guy out of Madison that I got to know a little bit, and he's like, hey, let me come through, check for hail and all this stuff, and we were able to basically get the full thing paid for minus the deductible. So it was, and it actually covered a little bit of siding and stuff too, where siding had been hit. So it was a good, in Texas, I have some Texas friends, and they say we never waste a good hailstorm. Yeah. So I mean, that one was pretty painless. I've had a fire in a unit that was in a 24 unit that we bought over Milwaukee, and that was a smooth insurance deal there. But we have had, I'm not going to talk about it right now because we're still kind of going through it, but we've had some struggles with some insurance stuff on properties. And obviously things are changing in the insurance industry. It's hard to write on insurance right now, where I used to be writing $220 to $250 a door per unit for insurance, and right now with certain carriers kind of not getting into the apartment game as much, we're seeing more like $275, $285 at best, but up to $325 a door for insurance that's going to pay out and be there when you need it. Which, once again, taking care of the asset is number one. So the insurance thing is tricky. I talk to my insurance broker all the time. We're pretty close and have a pretty good relationship. And he's like, over the next couple years, he's like, because these prices are getting so high again now, that's going to bring in more people to compete, and that's going to end up lowering the price again, is what he's telling me. And we're going to see if that's true or not here over the next 24 months. But yeah, the insurance game is kind of an interesting game. So,
how long? I'm curious. Like, how long does it typically take to receive the proceeds from these claims, and then when they deliver the proceeds, do you get them as the operator, or do they like to distribute them to the contractors that are going to be doing the repair work?
They'll usually distribute to the owner. Sometimes it'll actually have to go through the lender. And as far as the roofing one, for example, the one that went smooth, that was, that whole thing was done in a matter of 3 months. So it was just real quick. Now we've got another property right now that we've had for 2 years that we've been going back after and going back and forth with the insurance company, because it's been about 15 months now, and they haven't, in my opinion, paid what they should have paid, and they're trying to skip out on some things and stuff like that. So sometimes there can be fights and arguments over it. It just kind of depends on the situation and who your vendor is, and or who's providing you the insurance, and what what the details of the claim, right? So I'm still no expert. Yeah. I mean, sometimes and sometimes not. I'm no expert on it. We've got someone on staff now that's one of our regional managers that's like her background the last 10, 12 years has been in restoration, so she's really well versed. So this property that we're buying right now is actually, in April, there's about $1 million claim going on right now with the water loss. And so, that's been interesting as well, kind of going through this whole process and making sure that we're not going to be left holding the bag once the deal closes, next week or over the next, couple weeks here. But it's definitely helped to, I talk about all the time, if you guys or anyone that's watching follows my content, is being able to surround yourself with a good team, because you're going to come across situations where you're not always going to have the answer. You're not going to be well-versed in the area, and you don't necessarily have the time to become well-versed in the area. And so you need to have a team. You need to have other people that are there to help guide you, and then you need to be able to lean on them a little bit, but still, at the end of the day, take full accountability for what's going on. So if they mess up, well, really, it's my fault because I put them in that position to do that, right? So, but it's been helpful to have her, on our side kind of through this as we acquire this new property that's kind of going through this water loss claim that's affecting a handful of units. So.
Yeah, that's really good. Speaking of teams, I'm curious, and we ask a lot of the guests that we have on our show, because I'm always trying to learn how they structure their teams. What does your team look like today, and what roles do you specifically like to focus on, and which ones do you leverage out? Yeah,
so we're out there, we're raising funds, but then we're also operating. So we're not just raising funds and then have a third party man. We're operating everything. So we've got myself, and I deal a lot with the new acquisitions, getting investors, and a lot of the underwriting, and then a lot of the very, very, very high level stuff at our current portfolio. And when I get certain reports and I look at certain things, and when something starts to alarm me a little bit, then I'm a little bit more active at that one property, or whatever, getting after and trying to get it figured out and find solutions ahead of time. Then we have a chief operating officer. She came with us from another company, another big company, and she oversees, CJ is her name, and she oversees kind of all the day-to-day management, all the day-to-day teams. So she oversees our property managers and like the maintenance techs and those on-site operations. We have a controller, and she's been with us for 4 years now, which is essentially CFO. We've got a couple admin people in the office. We've got content creator. So that's, we've got about, on the Spaulding Group side, which is, responsible for finding the new deals, getting the investors, and then the operations of the property. We've got ballpark 28 to 32 employees there right now. Then I started a painting company last, 3 days into COVID. Most people bunker down, and, whatever. I'm like, I'm going to open up a business. So I started a painting company 3 days after the world shut down. And so we got 10 employees over there right now. So we buy this new deal. We'll have another 4 spots in Spaulding Group. And over the course of this year, we got some more hires that we're going to make in Spaulding Group that kind of give us a little bit more of a bench. So we'll probably be, 60, 75 employees probably by the end of the year. Spaulding Group, I'm not looking to get rich through the management of properties. So I really put all the resources, all the money that I have left over back into technology, back into people, back into our systems to be the platform that can then have, 4,000, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, 25,000 units one day. So.
And so it sounds like you are vertically integrated. Spaulding Group is your property management arm.
Yeah.
And so if you could do this over again, and as you grow, you're almost at 1,000 units now, which hire would you make first?
I guess if I could do anything different, I'd go bigger sooner to give me more resources to hire more people sooner. But, the first person I hired was bookkeeper/controller because that's where I struggled in the details. Like, I get how it all works, right? But I know where, like, we start at A, and I know what Z should look like, and I know maybe what B and, Y look like, but all those letters in between, all those steps in between, I have no effing idea how Ava does what she does and whatever. And so I would, no doubt that's the first thing that I would do. And so I think other people listening can't take my answer. It's where is your skill set at? What are you good at? Like, if you're good at that stuff, then maybe you should keep that, but find someone right away to operate the deals for you. right? If you're good at operating the deals, maybe you should find someone else that can go out and do acquisitions for you, right? So that's why I've kept acquisitions and the raising of money, because right now that's what I'm best at. So.
And so when you're going out and hiring an employee, I guess this is more of a general question, so it applies to like almost anyone listening. How did you start, Justin? Like, so you wanted to hire your bookkeeper. How did you go about identifying that person and determining who's right for that role and how much they should be paid?
Man, I mean, so like when I met with Ava, I think she was someone that kind of had like a chip on her shoulder, because I think she's of Mexican descent, and like there was a little bit of a language barrier or whatever, a very thick accent. And I think that she probably had a chip on her shoulder because maybe some people weren't giving her the opportunity she truly deserved. And like I saw that in her from day one, and I just kind of vibed off the energy that she threw off and like kind of the confidence. And she's, basically it was the first interview I did with her was just me and her at Panera Bread. And I said, hey, what do you want to do long term? Like, what are your goals? She said, I want to be a bookkeeper. I want to start as a bookkeeper at a really small company, and then help it grow into a really big company and become its CFO. And I'm like, done, sold, you're in, right? So I'm like, where do we have to start you at? And I can't remember if she started like at $13 an hour or something like that 4 or 5 years ago. But I don't know. Like I didn't have a set number that I was willing to pay. I just knew that I had to kind of get it off the books. I wanted to find that was something that I thought was reasonable to start with. And then I said, hey, you're going to have an opportunity to grow here. And so I think that's why, she came in for that $13 or $14 an hour to start with as the bookkeeper. And it's really grown into something for her over the last 4 years. And she's a leader within the company. So I haven't been the best at hiring. Initially, I wasn't the best at hiring, I should say. I don't know if I wasn't the best, but, as the company grew, right? So think about my shoes, right? This was all like grassroots. I mean, I started this thing with $20,000, right? So I didn't have like all this capital just to go spend on people or things, whatever. So I'm like, okay, what comes first, the assets or the people? I'm like, I need to go out and just get assets right now, so that then I have the management fees and can cover salaries, whatever, to put back into the people. So I'm out trying to do deals as fast as I can, and now we had at that point like 220 units and like no people. And then I just started hiring people, and they were good, and I'm thankful for those people that we had from 2015 to 2019, early 2019, but those people weren't going to be the people that would take us from early 2019 to what we went through in 2019, what we went through with COVID last year, what we've done so far this year and beyond, because they were just they became satisfied, or they didn't have the skill set or the want to grow anymore, or push themselves or change. And so when I hired our chief operating officer, I said, look, I'm going to get out of your way, and you're going to put your team together and all this stuff. I'm just going to keep going to buy deals, and I'm going to be there to support you and whatever you need. But this is going to be like, you're going to oversee it. I'm going to be out of your way. And so she came in, and basically, we had gone up to 16 employees by the early mid 2019, and a couple months after that, basically everyone was gone. It was down to the initial bookkeeper, Ava. She made it through that. And then CJ, who I brought on to be the COO, and myself, and we just built back up from there. And then what really happened is we still kind of had quite a bit of turnover. So what we did about 15 months ago was we really sat down and came up with a true, our actual core values of what us three were about. And we said, okay, we cannot, these are like our non-negotiables. Like, people don't necessarily have to have the background in whatever we're looking to hire, but if they have these core values within them, we can mold that person to be who they need to be on the job site, or to do what they need to do, right? To do what they need to do with the job. We just need to find, and so like when we started to do that, that's when a lot of stuff started changing, and I feel like we've been on fire recently over the last 6 to 8 months because of how we've been hiring. We've just had some great additions where, I think back to like 4 years ago, we had 2 out of the 16 superstars, which was me and Ava, our initial bookkeeper. And now it's like, now out of like the 25 employees, I mean, we're solid top to bottom, with like 8, 9, 10, like just real, like almost superstars. And so now the goal is, as we keep growing, is that those superstars like will suffocate out anyone who doesn't really belong here. And so that they'll just end up, the other people like do get in, because we might miss something in the screening process. They'll automatically just leave because they can just feel it in the environment that they don't belong. And because certain things just won't be tolerated anymore. We're trying to achieve excellence, and we work hard around here and results driven. If you don't have that, you're just gonna be choked out. You're just gonna tap out and not want any more. Or we'll let go of you pretty quick because we'll realize, because the proof is in the pudding. And if you don't have it, like if your pudding doesn't taste right, you're gonna get out the door, right? So, yeah.
So you mentioned the two roles that you hone in on are acquisitions and capital raise. Talk a little bit about the acquisition side, because I know just sourcing deals, maintaining relationships with brokers, but then also underwriting. That can take a lengthy amount of your time weekly. So do you have a couple guys that help you with the initial underwriting, or kind of walk us through that process?
No. So I pretty much do it. I mean, I've gotten to a point where I've got a really good, I've underwritten so many deals over the last 8-9 years where I feel like I've gotten to a point where I can kind of very high level, without taking as much time, know if it's a deal I should put more time into or not. And so I've been good at, just like where it's located, the age of the property, the current rent rolls, and I kind of have been able to look at some of that high level data and be able to be like, it's not a fit for us anymore, or hey, yeah, this is. Now let's do the deep dive on this and spend more time on it, right? So I'm not 100% of the deals that come across my desk. It might only be 10% of them that I'm diving really deep into. I'm not diving deep into all of them and running all the numbers and doing our models on all of them.
So outside of qualifying, I'm curious, outside of qualifying, the market, the neighborhood, the vintage, all that sort of thing, but actually looking high level at the numbers, what are the triggers that you look at in the initial underwriting that give you just allow you to make the decision, like, hey, we're going to pass on this and we're not going to waste any more time, or hey, this is worth taking a deeper look into?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the location, the number of units, and then I've gotten to the point where it's like, okay, what's the age of the building? I mean, I'm not as excited to look at a 1970s product anymore, because what's going on is it's a value add, and it's like, well, where's I'm already paying more in my mind. I'm already paying for the work that should be done that's not done already. And so, this newest acquisition that we're going to have is, it was built in 2010. We're buying things that might not need a straight up. They might just need backsplash now and new light fixtures and new paint. We're not trying to go after heavy value adds anymore. The deal we closed in January, I mean, it's not nearly as heavy a value add, but it's a newer type product. It's a little bit newer. The deal that we're buying now is not going to be as crazy heavy duty value add as some of the deals we've been into, but it's newer product, right? So that's kind of what we're looking into right now, and kind of we're just looking at newer assets right now. So
yeah, and we talk about this all the time amongst the three of us. Is a lot of the cap rates amongst A class, B class, C class multifamily are essentially on top of each other.
Yeah.
And I think you alluded to C class, B class workforce housing value adds. Sometimes those trade at the same cap rate as an A-class deal might.
Yeah.
But when you get into a lot of these deals, sometimes if there's not a lot of value add, sometimes the investor returns can be a little bit diminished. I'm curious, what kind of investor returns do you target today for your investors? What are they looking for?
We're trying to, depending on our hold time, so, we're trying to 2.25x to 3x plus investor funds over, if it's, 4 to 10 years, right? So now all the deals we do, I have full control on when we're going to sell, and so I give 10-year pro formas, but I kind of show a refi happening, whatever, because I know that all the deals we have now and all the deals that we will get, I know that we can win on them. It's just, I don't want to be, because of how I set it up with my investors, I don't want to be forced to sell in year 10 because it's got to be done in year 10 because I promised that the investors. So it's an open-ended thing so that we can be sure to sell at the right time, because I'd rather wait another 2 years when all investors might not necessarily want, they might get impatient. It's like, well, if we sell right now, because I only have a 90-day runway to sell, that's not going to do us any good. Let's just wait another 2 years, right? So I don't know if that answers your question. I guess I don't even remember what your question was, but I just started going down the tangent. And
I think you answered it. He was just asking about target returns, and you kind of answered the equity multiple piece.
Yeah.
I'm curious, so you're zigging when everyone's zagging in essence when you do 10-year holds. When most people in the industry are doing 3 to 5. So what led you to do those longer hold periods?
It's just straight up. So when I do anything, like most of the debt that we're getting now is recourse, but we do have some non-recourse loans. But with those non-recourse loans, I don't just have a 90-day window to refi. I've got an extension that goes on after that's in the first loan that once this first 5-year term expires, for 3 years it turns to adjustable. And at that point, I don't care what the interest rate is as long as I have debt on it, right? So I became, like 3 or 4 years ago, I became obsessed with having a longer runway to refi, a longer runway to sell. Because the people that I talked to in 2008, 2009, when they got in trouble if they had to refi in the wrong 30-day, 90-day window. Their property was performing, but there was no money. So it doesn't matter if the property's performing if no one's willing to lend. And so some of the guys I know, they were sitting on $1 million, $2 million, $3 million bucks. They could put more cash in, and now the lender's like, okay, now we have room for you because you're going to put more cash in. Even though, once again, in their rent, like you can look at their financial statements, they really didn't change it all for some of the multifamily stuff. But some of their loans were getting called. Not called. They weren't getting called, but they just weren't being re-upped or refinanced because it was the wrong. Like, think of it this way: like if there was people last year, if the government didn't bail us out, like what would have happened if there was no bailout and you had to refinance a loan within a 90-day window from like March 20th through June 20th? Like, I don't know. It would have been hard, and that's what happened in 2008, like where there just wasn't money out there for a little while, and if guys didn't have the capital, they lost the property. So I became obsessed with, okay, if I am going to have non-recourse debt, if I am going to have investors, I just want to make sure I have a runway. Now, we've yet to hold anything for longer than 5 years, right? But I want to have the option of a runway because I know my grandpa always tells me all the time, you're so smart buying real estate. You see that building right there? I used to pay $50 a month in 1955 to rent that place. $50 a month. And I'm like, Jesus, Grandpa, if I had that building, I could hang on to it long enough, I'm going to win on it at some point. So that's kind of my mindset and that's where it came from as far as just wanting that structure and that time frame.
I'm curious. You mentioned recourse. A lot of your loans are recourse. Are you doing traditional bank or credit union financing?
Most of our loans are non-recourse now.
Okay.
But we do have some that are recourse. So we as a part of this portfolio that we had bought, we got 32 duplexes. And they're all kind of in one area. We went with it just made more sense to go with a regional bank here that we have a really good relationship with the type of financing for that part of it right there, and that's recourse. So then we have one other building I think that's recourse. So other than that though, it's all non-recourse.
And given you're doing those longer hold periods, you're not always doing them as you said. You're ready to hold for 10, but you often get out at 5.
I want to have the option.
Yeah, absolutely. How does that change your strategy when slapping on some debt to the property? Obviously you want at least 10 years debt, it sounds like. So what are you looking for in your debt?
Yeah, so right now we've done, actually with some of these deals that are, whether it's a value add from a management standpoint or whatever, we've actually been going adjustable rate right now for the first 18 to 36 months or so, giving us another option to either sell the property early or refi into a 5 to a 7-year term at that point. So.
And is this like the Freddie floater? What kind of rate?
So January we did Freddie, and then this deal that we're coming up on right now is it's a bridge loan that we got through
awesome.
Through a lender out of Chicago.
Very popular. We just started a podcast this week. I wasn't actually on it, so I got to listen to it as a listener, and I learned some new things from the Untitled Capital that was on. Capital Lending.
Yeah, and I mean, like a deal we did in 2019, like we did 10-year debt on that, it was a CMBS loan. It was great. Like, I mean, 10 years interest only, and we're turning the corner there now where it's like we're getting all of our CapEx done. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, damn, like it would kind of be nice to have option to refi or sell this place because, right now we're going to leave a lot of capital on, but we're not, we usually don't refi a ton anyways. We'll pull out some, but we're not like a typical shop that's pulling out a ton of refi. So I don't like the concept of like adding all this value over 18 months, even though it could be real. in such a short period, there's too many macro things that could go wrong, in my opinion, for it to actually be solid, like rock solid, if that makes sense. So I'm always like, let's just get new capital, put new capital to work, and then a little bit further down the line, we can always look at refine or whatever. But.
And how did that bridge debt look? I know bridge debt's becoming more and more popular right now because the terms are becoming more favorable.
Yeah. Yep. So the deal that we're closing next week. It's 3 + 1 + 1, so it can be a total of 5 years. At each +1, each extension, there's a little bit of a fee. I can't remember, it's minimal. It's not very much. And then there's an 18-month period where we can't sell, I believe. If we sell, we just have to make them whole on the interest. And then after that, we can either sell or refi, whatever it might be. So and it's non-recourse.
Yeah.
They're fronting all the capex type stuff, which again, it's not like huge structural stuff. We're not planning on doing cabinets or anything like that. It's a lot of paint, a ton of flooring, a lot of light fixtures and stuff like that. Some common area amenities we're going to spend some good amount of money on. So.
And what was the interest rate you got in that bridge debt?
It's floating.
Okay.
So, day one, I think it's a 3. It'll be around 3.2. It'll be around 3.2 day one.
Very nice.
So.
Yeah, that's huge. And they're giving you money for the capex. You don't have to raise that from investors.
Yep. And then people are like, well, why would you want it floating? It's like, well, they make us buy a cap on it, right? So we have a cap on what the interest rate can get to, and that's going to cost us $40,000, $50,000. But you look at what we're buying the asset for and what some other comps are going for once we kind of turn this thing around a little bit, and it's a no-brainer to have a hard cost like that in there to do this thing. So.
Yeah, and you're not the only one. I think everyone's doing the floating rate mortgages. I know we paid about $50,000 for our last cap from I think it was Amrock who provided that.
Yep.
Our guest this week that aired, I learned that with interest rates potentially going up in the future as a hedge against inflation, maybe the Fed will bump them up a little bit to slow down that inflation. These companies that provide the rate caps, they're projecting the cost to go up on that. So it's kind of hard to underwrite how much the rate cap is going to be. We expect it to be about, like you said, $40,000 to $50,000. Maybe, you, Justin, or us get a property under contract in the future and they hit us and say it's $75,000, $80,000.
Yeah.
So it's things that are constantly evolving, just like insurance, as you alluded to earlier, where it's really hard to predict or underwrite.
Yeah, things change. And so that's why I never have like one set strategy with what I do for debt. And I look at what my options are right now and, what kind of our plans are with the asset. And then, figure out just what kind of, it's just like a puzzle, right? So I never try to be static in what I'm doing. I never try to be a robot. I just look at what's best for the deal and what makes the deals work and what is also a good thing for us and as signing on those on the notes and all that stuff. So you got to be able to be flexible. You got to flex with it. You can't just be rigid.
Yeah, constant pivoting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious, Justin, and maybe a lot of people in this position, and I know we are somewhat too. So when you said you had 220 units and you were kind of building everything on your own, you wanted to get some cash flow coming in until you started bringing on employees. When you first bring on those employees, I'm guessing you're operating under an LLC. How does that change legally? Like, did you have to shift to an S corp? Did you stay as an LLC to hire on those employees? What did that look like?
I don't. None of our properties actually have any employees. They're all employed by Spaulding Group, which is an S corp. And then Spaulding Group provides the services, right? And so those salaries we just essentially pass through to the properties. So if the property manager that we have out at X property, if we're paying them, $50,000 a year, essentially it's just getting passed through to the property. Spaulding Group then gets paid for that, and that's kind of how it works. We hold no employees at a property level.
And do you find that it's best to go S corp? I'm sure you just follow the guidance of your CPA, but
yeah, I remember when we did that. So technically, Spaulding Group I think is an LLC, but we file as an S corp.
Okay.
And so then it makes once again, this is why I have a team, right? And so it's like I listen to all this stuff, and I never need to fully understand it. I need to understand the high level stuff. And we also did an S corp too, so that I could be paid a salary, even though it just sits there and gets deferred. I'm not actually paid a salary I just get paid as money comes in, or if there's extra money or whatever for the services I do there. But I think that was part of it too. So.
Is it like Jeff Bezos' situation where his salary is $80,000?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and then it's just paid, paid whenever the company has some money and what. I'm trying to build my wealth and trying to get paid cash flow from the properties, right? Yeah. So every deal that comes through, whether I'm writing a $200,000 check, $500,000 check, whatever, I'm trying to put we keep, like right now, all of our real estate is within 1 hour in Wisconsin, actually. So as we, keep growing and acquiring here, we're looking in Iowa. We are not looking in Illinois. We're looking in Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. So I think we have another LOI out right now on a property in Florida. So there will be at some point where we leave the state. We'd love to be at 1,750 to 2,000 units by the end of this year. We have LOIs out right now in a total of 700-ish units, and so we're looking to grow and expand and keep adding to our infrastructure here at Spaulding Group and keep hiring people who are going to take us to that next level just as a company, and just to keep raising the level of performance of our platform so that we can keep performing really well as this thing grows and not get to a point where we're at capacity and not being able to perform anymore, So that's what we're really trying to do. We're trying to push the painting company. We're looking at starting some flooring and stuff as well, and get that thing cranking and get that to a $5 million a year business, and then move on to a $20 million a year business. So just a lot going on. And I just love. I'm most like unhappy or depressed or whatever when I'm just not doing stuff. Like yesterday was like the best I felt in a long time, and I got 3 or 4 LOIs out, and I'm just like, God, I love that, right? So I hate being content and not growing and not improving in at least 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 areas of my life every single day. So that's kind of what we're looking at doing.
I'm curious, you mentioned you have an LOI out in Florida, and you're looking in Tennessee, Carolinas, Texas. So, if you were to secure a deal a little bit more remote, would you rely on third party, or would you still vertically integrate your in-house property?
I think it's open for debate yet. My gut tells me that like this property in Florida it's a big enough property you'd have 10 people there full time. So I think it's something that we could still, and it's a big enough asset where we'd be able to get people down there if we needed to, whatever, right? So from corporate. So I think it's still open for debate, and we would do what's best for the asset and the property. And but 60% of my gut tells me that we would operate it.
And it seems like, so you're in a lot of MSAs, and which leads to more opportunities for LOIs, which is a different approach. But I'm curious, from an acquisition side, how do you keep up with all the deal flow, and how do you generate leads for deals in all those MSAs?
So the next step of the next person that we need here is someone that helps me with the deal flow and stuff like that. So we're going to need another acquisitions type guy for sure, or guy or lady.
Are you reaching out to multiple brokers in all these MSAs that you're targeting?
Yeah. So I'm subscribed to all their stuff, and so I got an email address that just gets pounded each day, and and so the bulk of my time is still spent on Wisconsin stuff, and then next I would say is probably Florida. We have a residence down in Florida too, a family residence down in Florida. So we're and we have. We already kind of have some roots there. I'm familiar with it, and I think that's where I'll be next. That's kind of where I spend the next amount of time. But all these brokers that I work with, they know where we're interested in looking and all that stuff. So we've been able to really do a good job of getting on top of brokers' pocket deals, pocket listings where they don't actually hit the public market. They take it to 3 or 4 guys because the seller doesn't want to go through the full marketing thing. So that's worked good for us. We've really been able to. My thing is I hate renegotiating on a guy unless it's a big deal, because I want to be able to do repeat business, right? And so like this deal we're closing right now, there was things that we closed. This deal that we're closing next week, it's the second deal we've closed with this guy. And 2 years ago when I closed the deal with him, there were things that I could have gone back and probably renegotiated, and I didn't, and I made it pretty easy on him. So when it came time to sell this asset, he literally picked up the phone and called me in January and said, hey, I'm looking to selling this. I want to give you the first opportunity because I'd like to do business with you again, and we're not going to take it to market. We want to get a deal done pretty quick, and I know you're not going to mess around with me. So that's been able to help too, is focus on some of that stuff. And then when we do get a deal under contract, realize your reputation is on the line all the time. And if you want to, I get people like, well, aren't you going to tell them about this? And aren't you going to tell them about that? I'm like, that's a $10,000 issue. That's a $12,000 issue. No, I'm not going to bring that up to them on a $25, $28, $30 million deal and renegotiate the thing on them. Now, if it's a $200,000 thing or there's a $1 million insurance claim going on, we got to make sure that that's cleaned up and it's good, because I'm not holding the bag for that. But I want to try to make it smooth and leave a good taste in their mouth so that they bring another deal. I'm 31, so I'm looking to do this thing for 65 more years or something until I'm 96, right? So yeah.
And Justin, that's great. That's smart business right there. So let's get to the final segment of our show called the Takeoff Round. Just a series of quick questions we ask all of our guests. And to start, what is the biggest mistake you've made in real estate investing?
The CapEx thing that I told you about on that first property. Just year 7, we'll take care of it. We'll figure it out. There'll be money there for that, And so that, I'd say that's probably the biggest hurdle that I've had to overcome.
And for anyone listening who hears that and is concerned that they're going to have the same issue, what advice would you give to them?
Take a deep breath.
How do you plan for that CapEx now?
Well, so now, now when we do property condition assessments, right, I never just go by the lender's the lender's PCA, because it's like they're just checking a box and the guy is there for an hour. So we get our own PCA that the bank doesn't see, that is much more thorough. The guys are there there's 3 or 4 guys there for a full day, and they're doing the roofs and they're doing and then we really put a plan. We're putting a plan in place right now for this deal to make sure we get all those things just taken care of and knock them out and have a plan for it. I'm raising a lot more money now than I did before. So this deal that we're closing is a $26.5 million deal, and we got the $1.5 million set aside, tagged for CapEx and amenity improvements and stuff like that from the lender. But then we've got another $700,000 on top of that we raised as investors, so we have excess cash. During COVID, when it happened in March, so after that first deal that I just talked about, where it's my mistake, I always wanted to have more cash and close with more cash than I needed. So before COVID, I actually would lose prospective investors who hadn't invested with me yet, because they're like, why are you raising an extra $700,000 or $1.3 million on this deal? You don't need to. I said, for a rainy day, and because there's always something that we're not going to know about that's going to come up, right? It always costs more to fix that freaking problem that comes up that you never knew about than you think it's going to cost. And just for the unknown. And then all of a sudden we raise this money, close that deal. 6 months later, COVID happens. And I can send before we knew it was going to before we knew that there was going to be all this money getting pumped in the economy, and we knew that people were going to get bailed out, I sent a letter saying, hey, we could have 0 revenue at all these properties and make it 6 months, because that's how much we had in reserves. Now, yeah, it would suck if that happened, because that'd be a lot of the reserve. But for future CapEx and to fix up some units and common area stuff and whatever, but we were still sitting on that. And so that right there was proof of why. So what I do now, to answer your question, we get PCAs done that only we see as the buyer, and it's thorough, and then we make sure we have excess reserves to be able to that we have the capital we need, right? Businesses are capital intensive, and the liberal politicians don't realize that how much money you need to put back into your business to continue for it to be successful. They just want you to pay tax on everything. And the problem is a lot of people that get into real estate, they don't view it as a true business. They just view it as real estate. And I'm just going to close the deal and not have anything in reserves. Well, it's capital intensive. Something's going to go wrong. You're going to need. So that's just really been my mindset: is get a PCA, have it be in depth, and then have reserves and have adequate capital to take care of problems and have a nice property, take care of the asset.
And how do you recommend others obtain the knowledge needed to get started and take off in real estate investing?
The best way is to just get in and do it. Because I read 150. I don't know. The number always changes. I don't know the exact amount of books I read. 125, 150, 175. Through college, and I learned the most when I went out and bought the 4 unit. And then when I bought the second one, and then when I did the storage unit deal, and then when I made the mistake on the CapEx deal on the first 88 unit building, right? I mean, like, you know, I made another mistake. There's one more thing I wish I could go back and do. The 199 unit we bought in November 2019, 75% of the property was month-to-month renters, and so like, I know what I'm doing, I go in there and like right away we try to get everyone to convert to year-long leases. I'll never do that again. You know, I mean, like we had an exodus, like overnight, people just left, and so like we'll do that over time the next time that happens, right? We learned that mistake. So the best way to learn is by doing it. I mean, you can read all the books you want, you can listen to this podcast on repeat, and when Cardone was on here and all those other guys you mentioned were on here on repeat, but like until you're actually in the trenches and like you got the shovel and you know you're going at it, you're never going to really learn or be equipped. And then even like, I'm sure all those guys that came on here, I'm sure if you know they were transparent, they still have problems today with certain things that they're figuring out. Like every single day we're coming across an issue that's like, shit, well, how do we? And then you just got to figure it out. You know, like there's very few things that will just completely wipe you out if you're willing to work really hard and just, you know, go roll up your sleeves and go do it. There's very few things, but every single day there are some significant bumps in the road or small bumps in the road, whatever, and you just got to figure it out and be like Teflon and have courage and go do it, and then that's how you're going to learn, right?
Yeah, just like in football, you know, you plan for a defense to play zone against you. They play a bunch of man. You just adjust the scheme. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's on the fly sometimes, right? I mean, sometimes they disguise the coverage, and Tom Brady is like, you know, he might snap the ball, and they disguise the coverage really well. And I mean, it's on the fly on his 5-step drop. On his third step, he realizes that, or second step, he realizes the coverage is different. But now he automatically knows just because he's been in the situation enough. But at one point in 2003, that really messed him up, right? And so now he's seen enough because he actually did it. Not just hearing about it from guys that came before him, like Joe Montana or whatever, right? He actually did it and been through it, and so now he can navigate his way through that stuff. So the best way
just throws that pick six, huh?
Yeah.
And Justin, if you could go back and tell your 25-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
So that was only 6 years ago. So 6 years ago, that would have been, I'm just trying to think of the year so I could think of like exactly where I was at. So what, 2015? I mean, I would have said, dude, buy every freaking deal that you see right now. That's what I would have told myself at 25, because I could have bought every single deal I looked at and you'd be doing okay right now, you know?
That's exactly what Grant Cardone said when we asked him.
Really? Yeah, I mean, that's because I look at it like 2015 is when I was, you know, starting to negotiate. Maybe that was early 2016 when I was starting to negotiate the 88 unit building, and I mean, people thought I was crazy for buying that for $65,000 a unit. I mean, and then there's so many deals I looked at that were like $75,000 a unit here in Wisconsin. I'm like, should have freaking done that all day, you know? But I'm like, oh, $75,000 a unit, and so I'd say that. I'd say that, and then just start bigger sooner, and then have a plan for the CapEx. You know, do that.
Hindsight's always 20/20.
For sure.
How can multifamily takeoff listeners get in touch with you?
So at Justin Spaulding, JUSTIN SPAULDING is my Instagram handle. That's where I'm most active. Also active on LinkedIn. I've got a book out there at www.justinspaulding.com. It's called The Sure Thing, and it's basically my entire my entire business real estate life story. And people are like, "Wow, you are so in depth in this book. This book's awesome." So but Instagram is the best way. Not to, you guys can cut this out if you want, whatever. But
we like it.
you know, Instagram's the best way to get a hold of me. And I mean, I try to reply to all the DMs there and everything. So
awesome, Justin. Thanks for joining us. On behalf of myself and Rich Summers, we're the Multifamily Takeoff Podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Mike and Rich. Appreciate it, guys.